and look down on the human drama and discern through your critical faculties what's going on without judging it. Just discern, what is this human drama about right now, and what role can I best play in it?
All the problems that we're facing right now, they're not problems. They're actually questions.
Who are we? Who do we really choose to be? How do we choose to relate to life itself? How do we choose to relate to all the different elements of life, the environment, the planet itself, obviously the people?
Why are we here, and where are we going from here?
What is the meaning of my life?
We're in a transition stage where the old answers are no longer sustainable, and that's why we're facing the crises we face. So there's a population in a state of flux saying the old stuff doesn't work, and we're ready for new answers that will create a newer, more sustainable civilization. Simple point, the old civilization is no longer sustainable, the answers are flawed, new answers are in, and we're in the moment of taking those new answers and weaving a new culture that will support those answers and support ourselves.
At this critical point in time, we have to redefine what it means to be human. We have to choose a new identity, literally choose a new identity, and recreate ourselves anew as a humanity. Recreate ourselves as a brand new kind of living organism, a brand new kind of species, and recreate the organism as a cluster, as a group, rather than as a scattering of single individuals. We have to change our thinking about who we are in relationship to each other.
We've been living in a competitive society for too long, and the world we see is the result, the ego, the competitive ego. What we have to do is learn how to cooperate and drop the ego and realize, again, that if we have people in one country that are very poor and people that are very wealthy, the wealthy are going to have to get big armies and big fences to keep those other people out. It's not going to work with the divisions of society that we have today and the stratification.
Man has to go through a change to realize that his life should be lived for the unity of mankind, and that we're all like one man and one heart, and we're sharing that desire, sharing that thought. We're all in mutual connection, making mutual concessions in reciprocity, like cells of a living body.
It's so simple, but we make it so difficult, and it's these hard things, these challenges, these horrible things we see are there to urge us to be better than we are. And I think until we start seeing that, they will continue, no matter on all levels.
We look at our economic crisis, we look at our ecological crisis, we look at our spiritual crisis, and we say, I'm not happy, society's not happy, what's wrong with us? So that is the trigger. We have to have problems to have solutions. Problems create creativity. There's no such thing as a problem. A problem is essentially a transition. So I see the crises of today as a transition point for humanity. I see them as not necessarily something that's out of the ordinary.
Again and again in nature, from the very most ancient bacteria to more recent species, They go through a juvenile phase of hostile competition to establish themselves. And then they discover the economics of cooperation. And when they find that it is cheaper and more efficient and more beneficial for everyone to feed your enemy rather than fighting them, then we are on the way to the new civilization we're all looking for.
The wonderful part about nature being fractal is that we can use patterns in nature to understand other patterns that exist, because patterns repeat themselves. So now if you want to look at a pattern that's playing itself out on this planet right now that would give us insight about what is going on. So I say, look inside a caterpillar that's growing. And a caterpillar represents, let's say, 7 billion cells living under the same skin. Each cell is a citizen. And guess what? They're like people like us. They're working every day. Cells in the digestive system are taking the food and breaking it down and making products out of it. Some cells are the motility cells. Those are the cells that move the caterpillar around. The structures of like our highways with trucks and vehicles carrying materials all over the place, something like that. Cells of the immune system are taking their job of protecting the system. Respiration system is making sure fresh oxygen is being delivered. So all the cells have jobs. The caterpillar's growing. If you were in there and a reporter, you look around going, yeah, the economy is going great guns. It's growing every day. Everybody's working, full employment. This is the kind of thing we love to see. How much are we growing every day? Some percent every day. And then the caterpillar reaches a certain stage of growth. And at that stage of growth, it just stops eating. It can't take in anymore at this point. It's reaching a maximum size. Then if you're a cell inside that community, imagine what would happen. That you're on the job and all of a sudden there's less food coming in and you're a digestive cell and you say, well, man, the work is slowing down here. The factory is slowing down. Then all of a sudden it gets to such a low level that many cells get laid off of the job. Now their cell's not working. Why? There's not enough food coming in to keep them all working. And as the food shuts down, then the other jobs are affected, because if there's no food, then there's no energy, and all the systems start laying off cells, and pretty soon there's massive chaos under the skin of a caterpillar. Why? The systems stop growing, the cells are out of work, nothing is evolving, and the thing is falling apart. If you were a cell in that caterpillar body at that time, you would look around and say, oh my God, our world is coming to an end. And yet, in the midst of those billions of cells, in among them are other cells genetically identical to them, no different. But they think differently. They respond to the signals differently. These cells have the interesting name called imaginal cells. And these imaginal cells come up with new visions. And what happens is, in the midst of all this chaos, when all the other cells are running around thinking the end of the world is coming, the new imaginal cells are laying out new ideas, new visions, a new plan, a new scheme, a new way of life. And around these ideas, the cells reorganize and they start to create new massive organizations to create something much more fabulous than the previous system. A system that is much more sustainable, a system with a higher level of evolution. And that system they're constructing called the butterfly. So there's a transition from an old world of caterpillar with an old belief system and an old way of life that was no longer sustainable. And therefore, you have two choices in this world right now. You can retain your caterpillar status and go, oh my God, the sky is falling, and be in fear. Or you can say, the caterpillar is going, I want to build the butterfly. Why? Because if I become active and, positive in the process of building the butterfly, I'm engaged, I'm working, we're creating the future. If I sit there and bemoan the loss of the caterpillar, then I'm making myself sick and everything around me. Why? I'm not contributing to our evolution. And so, where are we? We're at the demise of the caterpillar stage of civilization and the rise of the butterfly.
What we have to recognize is that all these crises, etc., is not outside of consciousness. Mm-hmm. It is also inside of consciousness. Mm-hmm. There is a plan to this madness. Mm-hmm. If we look at biological evolution, all big evolution is preceded by a catastrophe. So this is evolution of the human being that is going on right now. From being overly concerned with the negative emotions and the rational mind to listen to the values. Love, beauty, justice, truth, goodness. We need to hear that. But how do we hear that without the pangs of suffering?
I believe the issue is how can we cause the largest number of people to understand that we are in fact all one, to understand our unity.
The environment has to be changed so that we are supported in a way where we respect each other, while our value systems have to understand that we cannot survive any longer through our logical reasoning with the competitive mentality that's been perpetuated for so many generations. If the environment continues to reinforce this selfishness, it's going to be that much more difficult to climb out of it. So if we create an environment that helps us to have the courage to give, and it rewards and reinforces giving, then I think we'll move much more quickly into that type of bestowal mentality.
What we're beginning to see now is the fall of all the major institutions, whether it's economy, politics, education, healthcare, every fundamental level of institution in the world. So there's going to have to be changes at every level. And it starts with education and awareness. Why? Because the knowledge we bought into of who we are and why we're here turns out to be archaic beliefs that are not supporting our survival. We have to go from our old limiting beliefs that brought us to the current state of the world, rewrite those beliefs so that as we take the next step forward, we do so with new awareness, new power, and a new understanding of where we want to go. So we need to change education.
Just imagine what would happen if we changed our environment completely. What if we would constantly hear in the news, through art, entertainment, advertisement, that we're all interdependent, that we're all interconnected as one integral system? How would our world look like? How would you relate to all the others in that system?
You would suddenly begin to feel that you relate to others as somewhat close to you. You will be less concerned about how do I exploit the other, how do I manipulate others, take advantage of them. You'd begin to see that the other person is somehow close to you. You'll have some affinity towards the others, like they belong to you. You'll start considering them just like you think about your children or your family. You take them into consideration when you think about doing something in life. You think, how will it affect them? So that is the kind of change we need to go through. And it can happen to us through the proper environment that we create for ourselves.
Well, we have these negative emotional brain circuits of competitiveness and greed and jealousy and anger and what have you, but we can also create a reality in which we make positive emotions for ourselves and in our relationships, and we can create positive emotional brain circuits that we have created by voluntary acts of loving, deliberately, by practicing. That will then mollify the negative emotional brain circuit so we can overcome our base desires.
We began to think of emotions as having a kind of collective identity, as if they're emotional stampedes in human populations, a kind of a quiet riot that is just below the surface at all times. Because when we mapped this network, we were able to find clusters of happy and unhappy people in the network, and we were able as well to show that happy people are able to influence others to become happy, and that happiness can spread from person to person to person to person.
And it's this kind of view of the human superorganism that has really started to change the way we think about ourselves as human beings. We are connected. We are connected in ways that these other social species are, like schools of fish and flocks of birds.
Animals have this. So-called primitive people have this. We have seemed to have lost it. Through our intensive egoistic orientation,
if you recover this connection, then we will behave with greater solidarity to each other. We will extend our solidarity that exists in a family. We can extend it over larger areas, ultimately to the whole human family and to the living environment.
We can encourage people in all walks of life, in all kinds of organizations, to come to the notion of true global family and implementing the kind of world we really all dream of.
What has increasingly been found is that the happiest people have vibrant social networks. They work hard at cultivating the relationships with other people. So it's the togetherness, the bringing people together that brings people the most joy.
In some ways, science has always recognized that everything is always interconnected. But everything is also interdependent, and you can't study everything all at once. So science has been very good at sort of slicing up the world into little pieces and then diving deeply down each little piece, and that becomes a discipline. And it's very easy to forget that that piece actually is still connected to everything else. We conveniently forget it, which creates something which is ultimately a whole system, but it becomes fractured. And maybe that some small percentage of scientists are naturally drawn to this idea of how does the thing that I'm studying fit in a larger context? And so for scientists who think about that, they eventually get to the idea of, if they push it far enough, that the universe is really just one big thing.
We ask the question, why are we here as human beings? The answer is then left to something as simple and disastrously bad as, there's no reason for us to be here. We're just accidents of genetics, and therefore we could do anything we want because we weren't intended to be here in the first place. So we have a pretty big disregard to our relationship and the world around us and the nature that we live in, because we believe that organisms just got here by accident. When you look at the planet Earth, you find that we live in a very narrow zone that supports life. A perfect combination of gases in the environment, a perfect temperature and all this, and it stays constant, which has been a very unusual event of how can a planet keep a constancy in a world where everything is dynamic around it? And the answer is because nature has created one organism after another organism to keep the environment in balance and compensate for the ranges of activities that occur around us. So we keep what is called homeostasis. Very simple example is this. When the world was primarily plants, the environment, which had carbon dioxide and some oxygen in it when they first started, later became depleted of carbon dioxide, and oxygen increased because the plants were using the carbon dioxide continuously and releasing the oxygen continuously, and the balance shifted. And there was so much oxygen on this planet that the planet was flammable. So at times, lightning strikes would hit and burn up all the oxygen and burn up the planet. Life was not sustainable. So nature created a balance. And the balance was called animals. Animals breathe in oxygen and release carbon dioxide, which is the complete reverse of what the plants were doing. So why is this relevant? Because when you put animals and plants in the same environment, as the plants take in carbon dioxide and release oxygen, the animals take in oxygen and release carbon dioxide. This creates a cycle and a balance and harmony. So animal introduction was not just a random event. It was required to keep balance in. Now look at life as a seesaw that goes up and down. And I go like this. As I put one organism on one side, it throws the balance off and tilts the seesaw this way. So nature puts another organism on this side to bring the balance back. So I said, where are humans in this seesaw? And why is that important? Because humans have so much power that if we're not clear of what we're doing, we can take the seesaw and put a little weight on one side and shift the entire balance of nature. And then we have to learn to come back and shift the balance back again. Well, without our awareness of how we fit into nature. We lost sight of the fact that every other organism has been involved in keeping the environment more stable. We weren't to manipulate the environment. But if the balance now shifts way off because of humanity, then it means that nature will no longer support human life on this planet. It says that we have upset the balance of the environment and are causing our own extinction. So the writing is on the wall. We have to work collectively to create harmony back in the environment. When we become aware of this, we can engage in that activity as the primary direction of human civilization.
Can we, as a global tribe, get our act together fast enough to be able to change our behavior, our collective behavior fast enough?
There is a great potential, because it's not that if everybody has to change at the same time. What we talk about is a critical mass. You don't know how many people have to change for it to spread. But the fact is that when people begin to think differently, begin to act differently, that has an effect on others, it spreads.
Scientists at RPI have found that when just 10% of the population are deeply committed to an idea, their idea will always be adopted by the majority of the society. Now, what's interesting is their mathematical model shows that it's like a spontaneous leap. That is, below 10%, there is no visible progress. However, above 10%, the idea spreads like wildfire.
I don't think it's going to occur first on the whole among the leadership, neither political nor business leadership. I think there are always exceptions, and there are very enlightened political leaders, the enlightened business people. But on the whole, these people have too much stake on the present system, and they are afraid of change, because their own base of power and wealth lies in maintaining the current system. So the change has to come from elsewhere. I don't think it can come from the very poorest people. The very poorest people, maybe 2 billion people in the world, try to survive somehow. They have to get the food and the housing and the job and the healthcare and the education that is a minimum requirement. We can't expect it from that, maybe 200-300 million people who are really the wealthy and the leading classes. It has to come from those who are in between, who have a choice, who are becoming increasingly concerned, and who know that something needs to be done, and the hope is that they will wake up.
If there are people who are aware that the world must become integrated, then the question is, can they come together? Can they make the initial step towards this?
I think the problem with global crises is that from each individual's point of view, it becomes difficult to know what do I do about it.
When I say my ego and transform my ego, it's an illusion. How can I transform my ego when I'm dependent on so many other egos? So because of the efforts of a few, changes will start occurring. How? Because the pressure, evolutionary pressure, is acting on everybody. It's just that they don't have the right context. All they need is a trigger. The trigger will be provided by this upper echelon of people who are working together to develop positive emotions. So they affect a much bigger number than is indicated by the little community that started it. So one little change in one little community can affect a much larger human community. And the interconnectedness that we have through the internet, interconnectedness of the ego, all of a sudden, without even knowing that it is doing so, will change and establish itself. And therefore, changes can come very fast.
The basic idea is that there's this vast fabric of humanity stretching endlessly into the distance. I'm connected to you and you to others on out endlessly. Your actions can influence the actions and feelings of others around you, which in turn then can spread to still others and then to still others.
If you tell someone they don't influence anybody, they're not going to do anything. But if you tell them they influence 1,000 people, they'll change their lives. And that's why I think it's so critical for us to understand, first and foremost, how and why we are connected.
Thinking people, they can see opportunities in this. So we have to do this collectively. We have to do this collectively through dialogues, first between two people, through relationships between two people, and then generalizing it to a whole family, to the entire community, to bigger communities, to the country, to the entire world. Change the society to recognize that we cannot do this by ourselves. We cannot do this alone.
It's actually very simple what we have to do. It's just getting people to identify with it and see the benefit of what that offer is, the offer of working together, and how cataclysmically better life will be, right? Materially and spiritually. So.
The lack of connection between people causes all the sadness in the world. No question about it.
We are at crossroads, and it's not going to be decided by fate. It's not a destiny. We have at a point where the future of humanity is going to be decided by how people think about it today and how they behave. Awareness, awakening, these are the key terms. We have a chance to change. One thing we have to recognize is that to change is no longer a question whether or not. Change is coming. The only question is whether it's coming unexpectedly and abruptly on us so that we can't do much about it, we become victim of it, or whether we can anticipate it, create those major changes that will bring about a better future. And that is the unprecedented task of the generation now living.